I never expected to set foot in Cedar Hollow again. For 11 years I'd crafted a life elsewhere. Away from the small town, away from my past, away from the version of myself that had once fit too neatly into a life I hadn't chosen. In San Francisco, I worked quietly as a book editor, surrounded by manuscripts and coffee shops, urban hum and coastal winds. It was safe. It was mine. But nothing prepares you for the kind of phone call that pulls you home. My father passed in March, sudden and silent in his sleep, and my mother, my proud, fierce, stubborn mother, had a stroke 2 months later. Her recovery had been steady but slow. And my sister Claire's boy, Eli, had taken up residence in the old family home to care for her while I sent monthly checks and called just enough to avoid guilt. Until guilt won anyway. I arrived in late August, when the heat still pressed against your skin like a second layer. The bus was nearly empty. I stepped off with a suitcase in one hand and a folded itinerary in the other, my heart drumming a rhythm I couldn't calm. And there he was. Eli stood leaning against an old pickup truck I recognized as my father's, though the rust had spread and the dent in the side panel had been painted over. He looked older, of course. He was 26 now. But it wasn't just age that marked the change. He moved with a quiet assurance, arms crossed, gaze steady, the kind of poise that comes from loss and responsibility. He spotted me and pushed off the truck, smiling. "Aunt Jo," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered. "Eli," I managed, trying not to show how his presence unsettled me. He walked toward me, and I was struck by how much he looked like Claire. The same strong jaw, the same wide-set eyes, though his had turned a darker shade of green since I'd last seen him. "You look," I paused. "Grown." He laughed, easy and genuine. "So do you." He reached for my suitcase without asking, and I let him, following him to the truck in silence. The drive from the station to the house was only 10 minutes, but it felt longer, filled with soft conversation about road construction, the closing of the old bakery, and how the high school football team had made regionals last spring. I offered polite responses, my eyes drawn again and again to the side of his face. The sharpness of it, the way his hand rested on the wheel like he'd been driving this route his whole life. "How's she doing?" asked finally. "She's stubborn," he said. Which is probably the best sign of all. We pulled into the driveway, and the house rose before me like something preserved in amber. The white siding, the creaking porch, the hanging fern basket I gave Mom 12 years ago, still thriving. My chest tightened. Inside, she sat in her favorite chair by the window, wrapped in a crocheted shawl, her hands resting quietly in her lap. When she saw me, her expression cracked open into something soft and luminous. "Joanna," she said. I knelt beside her, tears springing without warning. "Hi, Mama." Her fingers brushed my cheek, featherlight. "You came." We talked for a while, about the garden, about the meals Eli cooked, surprisingly well apparently, about the churchwomen who still brought casseroles every Sunday. Eli disappeared into the kitchen and reappeared only when she dozed off mid-sentence. He gestured toward the hallway. "I put your things in the guest room. Thought you'd want the one that faces the garden." "Thanks," I said, following him. The room looked untouched by time. The lace curtains, the mahogany dresser, the faded floral bedspread I'd hated as a teenager and missed every year since. He stood in the doorway for a moment as I stepped inside. "I'm glad you're here," he said. Turned. "I should have come sooner." "Maybe. But now's what matters." His voice was calm, but the weight of it settled deep in my chest. When he left me alone to unpack, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands still. The silence in the house was thick with memory. That night, I wandered onto the porch, unable to sleep. I wrapped myself in a blanket and listened to the wind move through the trees, the screen door creaking softly behind me. I didn't turn. "I figured you'd be out here," Eli said. He moved beside me without asking, settling onto the swing. He wore a thin t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, his skin golden from the sun. "You always used to sit out here after dinner," he said. "Even when I was a kid. You'd drink tea and hum. You remember that?" "Yeah," he said. "You were quieter than Mom. But different. Warmer." The compliment hit me in a place I wasn't prepared for. I glanced at him, studying the lines of his face in the moonlight. It was uncanny, the familiarity and the unfamiliarity. The boy I remembered was gone. In his place was a man I didn't know how to see clearly. "You've done a good thing," I said, voice low. "Taking care of her." He nodded, eyes fixed on the night sky. She was there when no one else was. I felt something shift then, a thread pulling taut between us. Not inappropriate, not wrong, but real. "She still calls me your shadow," he said after a long pause. "Says I used to follow you everywhere when you visited." Smiled. "You did. You didn't seem to mind." "I didn't," I admitted. He turned toward me, something unreadable in his eyes. "You still don't." The swing creaked as it rocked beneath us, a slow rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Because in that moment, in the stillness of a small-town night, with cicadas singing and the moon casting silver across his skin, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I didn't know what would come next, but something had started. Something quiet. Something irrevocable. The next morning began with the scent of coffee and toast. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, wrapped in a robe, my hair still damp from a shower that hadn't fully woken me. Eli stood at the stove, flipping eggs with an ease that caught me off guard. "You cook now?" I asked, raising a brow. He glanced over his shoulder, that half-smile forming again. "Only when it matters." I slid onto the bar stool, watching him move. There was something calming about his presence, the way he filled a room without trying, the way he set 2 mugs out without asking how I took mine. He remembered. "Mom says you used to do this," he said, placing a plate in front of me. "Make breakfast like it was a ritual." "It was," I admitted, picking up my fork. "Back before I forgot how to make space for quiet things." We ate in a hush broken only by the occasional clink of silverware. Outside, sunlight filtered through the window blinds, striping the counter in soft gold. I looked up at him once, just as he did the same. And in that blink, the air between us shifted again, a glimmer of recognition, of a question neither of us had the courage to ask. Later we walked the perimeter of the garden. My mother had always loved her roses, and even now, Eli kept them alive, trimmed and watered, pruned with care. He knelt beside a blooming yellow bush and gestured for me to join him. "This was her favorite," he said, brushing a fallen petal aside. "Peace roses," I murmured. "She planted them after Dad lost his job. Said they were her rebellion against chaos." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Funny how grief hides in beauty. I looked at him, really looked, and saw it, the exhaustion behind his strength, the loneliness beneath his steady hands. He had been holding this house together with silence and duty, and no one had asked how much it cost him. "You need a break," I said gently. "I'm fine," he replied too quickly. "Eli," I said, touching his shoulder. "You don't have to be the only one holding her up." He stood slowly, brushing his palms on his jeans. "I'm not. You're here now." And there it was, the undercurrent, the weight of a sentence left unsaid. That evening, my mother insisted we all sit for dinner together, something formal and familiar. She lit candles, insisted on tablecloths, and wore the pearl earrings Dad gave her on their 30th anniversary. Eli humored her, pulling out her chair with a grin and pouring sweet tea into tall glasses like it was a sacred ceremony. We talked about everything and nothing. The way the magnolias had finally bloomed, the neighbor's new dog, the county fair, and through it all I watched Eli. Noticed the way he listened more than he spoke. The way he laughed at my stories but glanced at me just a moment too long. Noticed how my pulse picked up every time he looked my way. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen. Eli followed silently. We washed dishes side by side, shoulder to shoulder. The water was warm, the room quiet. Our hands brushed once over a spoon and neither of us moved. "I missed you," he said suddenly, his voice soft. "More than I thought I would." I turned toward him. "Eli." I know, he interrupted gently. I know it's complicated. You're my aunt. My breath caught. But you weren't around when I was growing up, he continued, eyes holding mine. You were a story. Voice on the phone. Postcard from somewhere far away. And now you're here and I don't know what to do with that. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I placed the last plate in the rack and turned off the tap. The kitchen fell into silence again, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ache building between us. That night, I sat on the porch again. He found me there. This time, he didn't sit beside me. He stood near the railing, his arms crossed, the moonlight outlining the slope of his shoulders. I don't want to make this harder, he said. You're not, I whispered. He took a step closer. But something's happening, isn't it? I stood slowly facing him. The air was heavy with night and memory and something delicate enough to shatter. Yes, I said. He reached up then, not quite touching my cheek, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his palm. I don't know where this goes, he said. Neither do I whispered. But neither of us stepped back. The next few days passed like whispers, slow, careful, threaded with silences that said too much. Eli and I danced around each other in the narrow hallways, our footsteps soft, our eyes avoiding contact when others were near. My mother, thankfully, noticed nothing. She had settled into her own rhythms again, dozing in her chair, muttering at crossword puzzles, asking Eli about his errands and me about books I never read anymore. We were careful, but that didn't make it easier. Each morning, I'd wake to the sound of the front door closing, Eli already out tending the yard or picking up groceries before the sun climbed high. I'd pour coffee, watch him through the kitchen window, and feel that same weight press behind my ribs. It was more than longing. It was the ache of knowing a line had been crossed in thought, in emotion, even if not yet in action. One afternoon, I found him in the garage, sleeves rolled, oil streaking the side of his hand as he worked beneath the old lawn mower. The air was thick with heat and the scent of rusted metal. I leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the flecks of muscle in his forearms, the quiet focus in his face. You always this handy? Yes. He didn't look up. I had to be. She depends on me now. I stepped closer, my voice lower. That's a lot for one person to carry. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes meeting mine. You being here changes that. I opened my mouth, but he stepped forward before I could speak. The air between us pulsed again, with heat, with memory, with whatever it was we hadn't dared name. You scare me, he said softly. And blinked. Why? Because I thought I had myself figured out, he murmured. And then you came back and now. I see you in the hallway, in the porch swing, and I forget that you're supposed to be just family. His voice cracked slightly on that last word, and something deep inside me responded. Not in confusion, but in recognition. I wanted to say it was wrong, that he was young, that I was his aunt, that some things were better left unsaid. But none of those words felt true anymore. That evening, rain came suddenly, pounding against the tin awning as thunder rolled in from the west. We lost power not long after, the house humming to silence, everything washed in gray twilight. Mom went to bed early, wrapped in blankets and warm memories. I found Eli in the living room lighting candles. One flame, then another. His fingers worked carefully, reverently. When he turned and saw me in the doorway, his smile flickered. No light. No distractions, he said. Just the dark. I stepped forward. I don't mind the dark. He held out a candle. Then come sit. We sat on the old couch, the air thick with rain and static. Shadows danced along the walls, making everything feel older, more sacred. My hands trembled slightly as I tucked my feet beneath me. Did you ever think about staying? He asked after a long silence. Here. He nodded. Not for a long time, I said honestly. But now, I don't know. I think I forgot how much I needed quiet. And familiarity. And you. The last word escaped before I could catch it. He turned to me, eyes dark and full of something fierce. "I think about you all the time," he said. "Since you came back. It's like my life opened a door I didn't even know existed." My breath hitched. "Eli, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly, leaning forward, his voice low and urgent. "I just need you to know that whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I see you. Not as my aunt. Not as the woman who left. But as Joanna. You." The way he said my name, with reverence, with ache, pulled something from me that I had long buried. I reached for his hand. Not thinking. Just feeling. His fingers curled around mine, strong and steady. And for a long moment we just sat there, our hands lit by the flicker of flame, the rain whispering against the windows. Later, after the storm had passed, I stood in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I felt him behind me before I heard him, that quiet gravity he carried like an unspoken promise. "I should go," he said. I turned to face him, every nerve in me humming. "You should." But neither of us moved. He stepped forward. One step. My back pressed gently against the wall. His hand brushed a strand of hair from my face. And then he leaned in, slowly, as though waiting for me to stop him. I didn't. Our lips met in a kiss so soft it might have been a sigh. It was quiet, cautious, full of questions we didn't yet know how to ask. When we pulled away, the world felt different. Changed. "Joanna," he whispered like a secret. I nodded, unable to speak. He didn't ask to stay. And I didn't ask him to leave. The morning after, everything felt heavier. Not in the way of regret, but with the weight of something unspoken finally given voice. I rose early, the light outside pale and quiet. The air still held the echo of rain, and the whole house felt washed clean, as if it too was holding its breath. Eli was already in the kitchen when I walked in, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He didn't say anything at first. Just handed me mine. His fingers brushing mine in a silent echo of last night. I looked into his eyes, tired, tender, uncertain, and felt my own uncertainty mirror his. Neither of us said the words. We didn't need to. After breakfast, I wandered through the house, touching framed photographs like they were fragile relics of a life I had only halfway returned to. My mother slept late. Eli moved through the garden, pruning the roses again, as if tending something real might keep the intangible in place. By the time afternoon came, I found him sitting on the back steps, a glass of water in his hand, gaze far off toward the tree line. I sat beside him, careful but close. "Did we just make things harder?" asked finally. He looked at me, the corners of his mouth tightening into a half-smile. "Probably. But do you regret it?" He shook his head. "No." Silence stretched between us again. Not awkward, not cold. Just full. "I've been so used to giving everything to other people," I said. "To the job. To the idea of what I should be. And now you show up. And I don't know how to want something for myself without feeling like I'm breaking a rule." Eli's voice was gentle. "Maybe it's not a rule. Maybe it's just a story you've been told. One that says you don't get to choose." I turned to him, heart thudding. "And what do you think I should choose?" He met my gaze steady. "You already know." I didn't kiss him then. I didn't need to. Everything about the moment, the way he looked at me, the quiet between us, was already a confession. That evening we had dinner together like any family might. My mother at the head of the table, Eli beside her, and me across from them. She chatted about her favorite recipes and how she missed driving, about the old neighbors and what flowers should be planted next spring. Her voice was clear, warm, and aware. And in that brief hour, Eli and I played our parts. But something inside me had shifted. After dinner, he and I cleaned the dishes. Our hands moved in rhythm, but we didn't speak until the last fork was dried and the water drained from the sink. "I can't stay here forever," I said softly. "You know that." He nodded. "I don't expect you to. But I don't want to lose this," I whispered. "Whatever this is." He dried his hands slowly, set the towel down and turned to me. "Then don't." Later that week we drove out to the edge of town, the overlook where we could see the valley stretch below like a painting come to life. It was late afternoon, and the sky burned with orange and lavender. He leaned against the hood of the truck, his arms crossed, gaze on the horizon. "I used to come here when I didn't know what I wanted," he said. "Now I come here when I do." I stood beside him, letting the breeze catch the edge of my shirt. "And what do you want now?" He looked at me, eyes honest. "A life that's mine. One I don't have to hide. I don't know how this fits in that yet. But I want to find out." "I do too," I said. We didn't make promises. We didn't define it. Not there. Not then. Instead, we stood together, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the valley as if it belonged to us. When we returned to the house, my mother was waiting with a story about the neighbor's cat getting into her shed. We laughed, ate apple pie, played cards late into the night. And Eli brushed past me in the hallway later, fingers lightly grazing mine, a whisper of connection that didn't need to be explained. Weeks passed. I helped with appointments, with organizing closets and clearing out Dad's old tools. I spent slow mornings with Mom, long afternoons at the library reconnecting with dusty ambitions, and quiet evenings on the porch swing, where sometimes Eli would sit beside me, close enough to feel the warmth, not close enough to invite questions. We learned how to move together, how to wait, how to build something not on impulse, but on recognition, of timing, of silence, of self. Eventually I extended my stay. Not forever. But not just for a visit either. Eli didn't ask for more. He didn't have to. What we shared was a quiet thing. Something real. Something steady. Not loud, not reckless, just deeply felt. And maybe, in this small town, in this unexpected return, I had finally found the kind of love I never knew I needed. One that didn't demand answers. Only the courage to stay.